And we are recording. Hi, everyone. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy, and today I have Leo Eisner from Eisner Safety with me. This
Hey,
is a
everyone.
recorded interview. It's live for the participants that are here, but we're going to be posting this on YouTube for everybody to download and share with their friends. So you'll be able to share that link. So don't worry about getting a recording. Don't worry about whatever he puts on the screen. You'll be able to access it. But at the same time, it's recorded and this is live. So anybody that's live will be able to hear whatever you say. So don't share
Uh-oh, I'm in
confidential information.
trouble. Oh, no.
And please, if you have confidential questions, the right way to do it is to go on to Leo's site, eisnersafety.com, and schedule a meeting with him, and he'll be happy to sign NDAs, and he'll be happy to review your information. And part of this is for him to get more business, but it's also for my firm's purposes to try to get up to speed on these new revisions that are coming our way, and how do we plan and prepare for projects that we have ongoing right now where people are doing testing. Do we test to the old standard? Do we test to the new standard that's coming? When is it coming? What will be the impact? How do we plan for that? And for anybody that doesn't know Leo, um, Leo is the expert in the world on electrical safety for medical devices. And anybody can debate that, but back when I was teaching courses for BSI, we had this thing that we would say at the beginning to people. Um, we would say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you in knowledge? So 1 was you almost could spell the standard, or you had heard of it once before. 10 was you've written the standard, you were on the committee. So Leo's been a number 10 multiple times in multiple countries for multiple standards. So when we say he's the 6601 guy, there's nobody in the world that's been doing this longer with more standards and more committees and knows this topic better. And he's even hesitant sometimes to say, well, I'm not really an expert in this, like if it's 6601-1-2 for EMC, he's like, Bill's better person to ask for that because he's more involved in that standard. So Leo is very hesitant to claim that he's an expert in something, but there is nobody that knows this stuff better and has been around doing this longer for medical devices. So he is the source. There are people out there that can do this and could do a good job of it, but when you're really looking at standards and releasing the standards and the changes that are occurring, he goes to the nth degree and really tells you, when he does a gap analysis, these are all the changes, all, let's say 700 changes, and he'll go line by line, clause by clause, word by word, telling you what the difference is, tell you the meaning, and it's really an invaluable resource. So we're very lucky to have him give his time freely to us. And if you need help with electrical safety testing, I can recommend nobody better, and haven't recommended anybody else to do this for a decade almost now. It's been since 2012, so we're pushing the decade mark.
Wow, I
So
didn't realize it's been that long since
yeah,
we've
it's been
been doing
2012.
it.
Yeah, and that's when I started talking with Joe too. So it's been about the same time for him.
Yeah, that's right.
So now off to you. I will let you do a little intro of your own, and then we'll get into the questions, which I already see there are a couple people that put stuff in the chat, but I think they're hellos. But
Right. Well,
please go ahead and start putting the questions in there, and I'll monitor the chat.
well, thanks for that great intro, Rob. I don't know how I can top that. I'm the head of Eisner Safety Consultants. I've been doing that for 22 years already. I've been in the product safety world for 35 years. I've been involved in the standards committee work for about 15 years and involved in 601 for, I think, 26 years. The standards committees, involved in a ton of different committees within 601, including the interpretations group, which is mostly the test houses. I'm one of the very few consultants in the group. I'm also in the risk management group under the CB scheme, which is, again, test houses. I think there's 2 or 3 consultants in that, and that's fairly recent. It's the risk management group within that, which has reformed and changed its name so many times in the last year, and that's dealing with the test reports, the CB scheme test reports, which all test houses use just about. It's part of the 601 test report. And there's also the usability test report and the alarms test report, and we'll get into that a little bit probably during the talk, I suspect. Also, I was on the expert panel for the ASCA program a couple years ago at FDA, talking about the 601 acceptance program that they're talking about setting up. Hopefully that'll become reality because they'll make it easier that the test labs, test reports will be accepted more globally by FDA instead of being reviewed more like they are currently. So hopefully that'll become a reality. So I'm connected fairly well with some of the people more on the standards and conformity assessment side at the FDA. So I have a direct tie-in when there are some questions. I can talk to some of those people who are not, there's sometimes the technical reviewers on projects for 510Ks and PMAs and stuff, but typically not the direct frontline reviewers from what I understand. But Rob knows more of the reviewer side of things than I do. And we work together a lot, Rob and I, in that respect. I'm also a notified body reviewer. I've worked for several different notified bodies over the last, I don't know, 25, 26 years. And I'm also a product reviewer for NSAI. And I started my career not doing medical devices for 9 years at UL, doing burglar alarms, fire alarms, ATM machines, computers, plastics, flammability, all these weird different things. And then I found medical devices and never turned back, and been doing that for probably 26, 27 years now. Off to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Leo. I already have 5 questions that I've written down, and we have one already on the queue. So I think what we probably ought to do is give a very short, abbreviated explanation of why now we're giving this presentation, and it's to let people know that these standards are revised and they're going to be released very shortly, and people want to know, oh no, do I have to retest everything right now, or is the testing that I have going on right now going to be okay for my submission? And it depends on what country you're going to as well. And there's transition periods which they'll recognize both. So maybe you can explain that to us.
Okay, so that's a very layered question there. So I'm going to do the 2 major countries, being the US and Europe. So these standards, actually, these 2 have not been released yet physically, but they should be anytime. I've been monitoring it like daily, if not multiple times a day. These, the 1-6, 1-8, 1-9, 10, 11, and 12 were all released last week, which I did not expect. I expected them in August or September. It was the schedule. It was August on the schedule is what is on the IEC system. And I expected it to be late because of COVID. Everything's been late, and IEC is never on time. So I was blown away when it showed up last week. And the secretariat that I talked to probably multiple times a month sent me an email because I've been asking and bugging her. And she said, yeah, I did not expect this, but you know, this 1 or 2 showed up on the 22nd last week. And then the whole other bunch showed up on the 23rd because I set up a search on the IEC website and it popped up and it was like, wow. So I sent out a LinkedIn note. So all of these have shown up already. In the IEC standards, all 8 of these standards In the front of the standard, it says, and I don't know what you call the front of the standard, to be honest, because it's not like a forward, I don't believe. Let's see, do I have it here? Is this one of them? Yeah, the SNEFDIS. It says basically that there's it's a recommendation from the committee. It says it right here. What is, oh, it is the forward actually. It says, it is the recommendation of the committee that the content of this publication be adopted for mandatory implementation, but it's a recommendation, so it's only guidance, because the committee only can give guidance to the national regulator, whoever that is, whatever country, adopted for mandatory implementation nationally, not earlier than 3 years from the date of publication. And that's across all 8 of the standards. I double checked that several weeks ago after Rob and I sort of did a dry run through some of these questions that we were sort of discussing, trying to figure out what we wanted to talk about a little bit. This also came through as one of the many questions that came through when people were registering. This was one of the big questions, was what is, who's driving this? Is it the standards committee or is it the national regulators that are asking this question of implementation? So now the question of US versus Europe. Europe expects you to be up to date. Now the question is it state of the art or harmonization? Harmonization has just blown apart in Europe. Under the MDD, it sort of was working, but sort of not. Under the 601 system, in the last, I'd say 5 years, it totally obliterated and fell apart, because the HAS consultant and the harmonization of 601 just fell apart. They were so far behind actual harmonization of the series of 601, other than maybe 60601 itself, -1, the standard here, the electromedical device and system standard, which is the base standard, the general standard, and maybe -1, -2, and maybe these two. Very few of the particular standards, which I'll show you this, which are these standards, which are the specific standards towards what are specific to certain technologies like infusion pumps, and high frequency surgical is -2-2, and infusion pumps are 2-24. Those are some of the more common standards that people use a lot. 2-2 has been around forever. That's why it's such a low number. And I'm jumping.
So just for a moment of clarification, these changes are limited to the -1 standards series. So they're only collateral, not particular standards, correct?
Yes, that's so. If you look at this drawing, which I should make this bigger so it's easier to see.
Anybody that's not familiar with these standards, you have a general, which is IEC 6601-1. You have collateral
I've trained
standards.
Rob very good at this.
Collaterals are -1s, and there's
which
a whole series of them, which is what we're talking about.
-1-X here. Yeah. So these are
particulars
the
are at the bottom. The
very good, Rob.
-2-X.
I've trained Rob very well on this. It's taken a while, but he's learned.
Okay. So the question from Stephen in the chat, if it impacts that, the answer is no at this time.
So for Europe, the harmonization process has fallen apart. So a lot of people are asking, do I use state of the art? And my approach has been, yes, that's the best solution, but you need to check with your notified body what their approach is, because not everyone's consistent with state of the art on notified bodies. And I don't think every notified body knows what they're doing yet with state of the art, especially for an MDR.
Yeah, and that will change as they release common specifications under the MDR. We will find that a common specification in one product family specifies a state-of-the-art standard, and that may differ from what the notified body is in general calling the state-of-the-art, and that may create some conflicts. So uh, you need to communicate with your notified body early to make sure that what you're submitting is state of the art, or you will find yourself retesting.
Yeah, and I think for medical electrical devices, you're not going to end up under common specifications, though.
You
Is
don't
my
think they'll?
guess.
You don't think they'll have it?
I'm hoping not. I think that'd be ridiculous because common specifications are going to be the devices that are more the oddball devices at this point, at
Yeah,
least.
yeah. That's probably true. Things that
But
don't fit nicely.
there are a couple that could be medical electrical under there. There's some electrical based devices on that list.
Yeah.
So they could end up under 601 based. Potentially. We'll have to see. For the US, it's basically, as Rob and I have discussed many times, it's only products that you're going to end up resubmitting or new submissions.
So for anybody that's not familiar with the U.S. process or not familiar with regulatory submissions in general, the U.S. is unique in that they do not require you to keep everything up to date to the most current standards. What they require is if you modify your device in any significant way, they require that you resubmit a 510K if it's a 510K pathway for that device. And they actually have two guidance documents, one for modifications to devices and one for modification to software. So either one of those two guidance documents could trigger the need to do a new 510K, but it all comes under revisions. So if you don't modify your device, you don't have to resubmit. But in the world of electromedical devices, you almost always have components that change and go to end of life faster than you want them to. So it's almost impossible to have an electromedical device that doesn't get modified. And it really is impossible to convince somebody that really you've had the product on the market for 10 years and there's no changes. We don't believe you, is what you hear. And I've actually heard those words. We don't believe you. There's so many electrical components in this device. It must have changed something in the last 10 years. So that's when you get triggered to have to redo these tests. And so knowing the timing of these new standards and knowing the timing of a new release of your product, it sometimes is a strategic decision as to what is the best timing to submit those new 510Ks for device modifications. Do you want me to ask some of these questions here? Are you ready for some questions?
I was going to point out one other
Go
thing,
ahead.
or two other things real quick. So these 8 standards are the amendments project, which took basically about 5 or 6 years for the committees to all put together and do. And they're mostly clarifications, but also some testing and other details. And we'll go through some of the changes. The standard in the collaterals that is not shown here, that was not part of the amendments project, is the X-ray X-ray diagnostic. Yeah, diagnostic X-ray standard 1-3, which is on a different committee, which I've never been involved in. It's just not a committee I'm involved in. So it's on a different timeline that's going to publish sometime late next year.
Okay. So if any of those standard, and if you have an electromedical device, number 1 is going to apply. The 1-2 will probably apply. Usability will probably apply. Alarms will probably apply. And if you have a home use device, the -1-11 will apply. So probably for most devices are going to have 4 out of the 8, and any home use device are going to have 5 out of the 8. And the other 3 are less common for sure.
Yes. The other point is the particular standards, the -2s, if you have a -2, are going to lag and are going to be the particular standards. If you have a particular standard, that's where the crux is. It's those are going to be several years behind before they publish, from 1 year to 3 years behind potentially, to line up with this series of updates. So the question is, do you use the previous version, which is going to be probably close, but this is a significant change here, the 1-2, and there are some significant changes, but mostly clarifications. This is where the rub's going to be primarily. This comes into 62366-1, and this could impact you too.
Yeah, I think some of the products that have lights that provide an alarm of a battery running low or something could even be a potential redesign. So those are important things to consider. You may think, oh, this is no big deal, it's just going to affect my testing, but that's not the case. It might actually affect your design because of the alarms. We have a couple of questions here. So one was, it's moving fast here.
Yeah, I see.
Yep. So will the particular standards be updated to reflect the amendments, or will they wait to reflect the 4th edition? And I think your answer is that they're going to lag, and they're going to eventually catch up, but they're always going to lag, and they're not going to jump ahead. They're going to just continue to follow.
They will align with this set of amendments before the 4th edition is worked on. The 4th edition right now is scheduled to start probably in about 2025. 2024, 2025 is the rough schedule at this point. There is an architecture document that has already been published. I think it's on version 2 or 3. That's internal within the committees, that's been published. And IMDRF has been involved in that, and FDA has been involved in it, which is primarily who IMDRF has had the focus with, which Scott Colburn's been very involved in, who's the head of the Standards and Conformity Assessment Group. So that's already been going forward. We've had a lot of discussions on that, and it may be like an HTML-based standards database where they put all the standards on a database, and when you decide you have a product that has the 601-1, 1-2, 1-6, 1-8, 1-11 with a -2-2, a 2-24, a 2-66, I'll put it all together, make it one document, and you have a spec.
Okay.
Which would be nice and hard at the same time, because for small manufacturers, that's going to cost a fortune, because it's all going to be IEC based then. I don't know how you're going to roll it out to all the different, like BSI and EVS and everyone else, like Estonia and whoever else.
Yeah. I knew this question would come up. Somebody asked, what are the changes that are expected in the -1-2 standard for EMC? And I know you've talked with Bill. Bill, that's Bill's expertise, but maybe you can give us a little bit in summary of what changes there are on the -1-2. And I think a lot of it's related to the RFID stuff.
Yeah, and I have written notes because that is not my expertise.
Yep.
So there's a couple. The smaller test is conducted emissions, which is CISPR 11. Now there's a min and max test versus there was just one level test where you just did one range instead of high and low. So if you have only one rated rating for input, you don't have to do this at min and max. So now you're sort of doubling your test. So it's about, I think Bill suggested about a 4-hour test. So it's probably 800, $1,000 of test time, roughly. And that's a rough gut. That's, Southern California test time. And I know Bonsi probably could tell us how much it is, but let's not have him jump in right now. Then there is this RFID test, proximity magnetic fields. 2 of the 3 of these tests are AIM 7351731 standard at a couple different frequencies. One's a very high 65 amp per meter. The other one's at 7.5 amp per meter. And the third of these tests are not this AIM standard. And this AIM standard, from what I understand, and these come from FDA, really push this. From what Bill and I can figure out, there's not many labs in the country that do this testing. So that's going to be an interesting aspect. And these become mandatory in 4.1 of the EMC standard. And it's not called EMC anymore. And this, the guy at FDA, Jeff, I always say his last name wrong, Silderberg or Silverberg, I always say it wrong. So excuse me if I said his last name wrong. It's EM Disturbances now. And it's been that way since 4th edition, but I always say EMC. It's just a bad habit I have.
Well,
so it's
That's
EM Disturbances.
what the guidance says anyway.
But the guidance is old.
Yeah, of course.
It's old. And if they haven't changed it, that's, it is what it is.
Yep.
But the standard has been updated since 2014. The guidance is probably older than that.
Yes.
I believe. It's been around for a while. But they do reference 2014, I do believe, in the guidance. So there is, the third test is a home healthcare environment test, and that's a 8 amp per meter test. So I don't know if that's specific to only home healthcare environment devices or not, but it also, I believe, is referenced in the home healthcare guidance. I believe, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And then there is, in the back of the standard and guidance, there's a rewritten section on the application of risk management, which I think is good because it's rewritten in a much easier to read manner. And I think it's going to highlight to test labs that there's a lot of test labs that don't understand the EM disturbances standard. I'll get that right one of these years. Because there's a lot of EMC test labs that don't understand the medical device EM disturbances standard. They're used to doing the 61,000 standards, which are what the 60601-1-2 is based on, which are sort of the test methods. But then the 1-2 tells you some of the criteria above it that says, do it this way. And you have to have essential performance and verify the essential performance and do the risk management and confirm the risk management and have a test plan, which the manufacturer is supposed to do, and have this labeling. And a lot of test labs don't do all of that stuff and confirm all that stuff. And then you get test reports that are missing all this. So when I review for NSAI as a product reviewer, the manufacturer's tech file, those are the things I find missing half the time in test reports.
So you're, just for people that haven't worked with you in the past, you can help them up front with identifying the testing that's needed, but also reviewing their technical documentation, including the risk management documentation, to make sure that it addresses each of these things that have been added to the standard that weren't in there in previous versions. And then when you get the test reports from the lab, you can review it again before it goes off to the FDA, because what you don't want to have is 3 months go by and then the FDA coming back with deficiency reports and the lab wanting to say, well, you know, a lot of time's gone by now, we can, you know, we're going to charge you more money for these revisions, even though it's our mistake. So it's much better to have somebody reviewing the report right away and say, oh, wait a second here, before we submit this, you're missing certain things that are required in the standard. And even when you're working with a nationally recognized test lab, one of the NRTL labs, they still make mistakes in reports. And you need somebody like Leo that knows the standard intimately to really catch that.
And EMC labs are not always NRTLs, because EMC labs don't fall under the NRTL typically. Some are, but those are safety labs or NRTLs typically, yep. Not EMC. Also, when I do technical review for NSAI, that's notified body, but it also applies that way as well.
We get
Next question.
Yep. So our notified body accepts the date of the -2 for the device over the date of the main -1 standard. How do the other notified bodies interpret the dating issues between main and particular?
I think it depends on the notified body. I've seen so many different variations. Some say state of the art. What is the state of the art of all the standards? And you need to clarify that with the notified body. Sometimes you have to give them a justification. Sometimes you have to give them a gap analysis of what you've done and justify it. So it's all across the board at this point.
And how you address it in your own risk management. If you have a risk control that's in there, it should be put in the context of, is this state of the art or not? Is this following the latest version of the standard or not? You might even do something different than the standard because you've got a different design that doesn't make whatever risk control is in the standard applicable. So
I think following risk management with justification is a good way to go with state of the art.
Yeah. So somebody was asking, just in general, if we could go through some of the significant changes and revisions. Maybe you can talk to some of the changes in the -1-8 for alarms.
Sure. So there's a lot of textual changes, and I would not call myself an expert in that, so I didn't go through it in significant detail. But I did talk to one of the authors that worked on it, and the significant change is they worked on the sound files, and Amy Foundation put a significant amount of money into doing some usability studies and figuring out like a 1.5 years worth of research into it and updating the sound files. And they're optional versus the old sound files. And it looks like, from what I can tell, there is a physical link in the draft, which I assume is in the published version, but I don't have access to the published version yet. I'm waiting for the Amy database to update, which I asked the US Secretariat, who happens to be the IEC Secretariat, and she says she hasn't had time to even think about it yet to know the schedule. So that's the answer I got yesterday, I believe, when I asked her. So that's the most up-to-date schedule I have on when the Amy standards will be updated. I will get that out of her as soon as I can. I suspect it will be a couple months is my guess, because I don't know if she needs to make, I assume she needs to make it an ANSI project, I suspect. I don't think she just can update them, but I haven't looked into the Amy the whole Amy database for the standards committees was going through a whole major update which that database is a mess. So back to 1-8. So the sound files, they're optional. One thing I found out last night when I was digging through 1-8 is for these new sound files, there's a couple things I found. I clicked on that link because I was curious, because Rob and I were talking about those links. I found there's a download on the IEC website under subcommittee 62A. So if anyone's curious, I can send that link to them directly. So if you send me through my website, you can contact me, and I'll send you the link and you can check it out. I'm not positive, but you can check it out. It may be the new sound files, it may be the old sound files, because when I looked on the 62A website, it was referencing the older standard, so I'm not sure if they're the new or old sound files. It's a huge zip file, so I didn't want to mess with it last night. I just didn't have time. And I don't know what format they're in. But in the Annex A, which is guidance and rationale, so it's only information or guidance, it said the intent of the next amendment or addition, the committee is considering making the Annex G, which is the new sound files, mandatory. So that's a warning signal to people that maybe these new sound files may become mandatory over optional. So that's just a good piece of information to be aware of. So the other two things that I noticed as sort of significant changes, or well, one is not totally significant but important, is there was a test set up in clause 6.3.3.2, and I call this bingo because all the clause numbers get so long in some of these standards. Is there was a test setup and configuration change due to incorrect reference, figure, and table of an ISO standard 3744, which I couldn't tell you what that standard is. And it was based on test source and locations changing. So it may impact results based on what you did in the past. So just to be aware of that. And they added new distributed alarm system requirements in 6.11.1. Those are the three things I'm aware of offhand. There probably are other changes. Those are the three I'm most aware of.
For the -1-6 standard for usability, for people that, a lot of people say, do we have to comply with both -1-6 and the 62366? And is there specific testing that we have to do? Or is it just a review of what testing we have done as a company for usability and submitted with our device and our documentation?
So from the CB scheme perspective, which is the test lab perspective, they review documentation. They don't do the testing of the usability. That's the manufacturer's responsibility. So the changes in the 1-6 is they're referencing, instead of the older 62366 standard, now it's switching to 62366-1, which is good because that's what FDA has been referring to for the last year or two, roughly.
Yep.
I don't remember the exact changeover, but it's been the last year or two that FDA now has been referring to 62366-1. And I believe I don't remember, but I thought harmonization is also supposedly switching that over, but I may be wrong on that. Not that harmonization exists anymore in my mind, since harmonization got rejected anyway. I can't remember on that. I'm probably wrong on that response.
Well,
So,
I think the point that there's, when somebody sees that standard, it's not another usability test that you're paying a lab to do. It's
A review
it's a
of document.
technical review of the testing that the manufacturer did.
It's a review of documentation.
Yeah, and
putting
which standard you did
in,
your testing to, and is not as important, because usually your usability testing is to an in-house protocol that's specific to your device, because the usability standards are somewhat vague and all based on what are your critical tasks and your risks associated with use errors.
Yeah, you still need to follow sort of the overall 62366-1, which is different than 62366, though. Enough to be able to fill in the holes.
Good point. Because it's you want to follow the -1 standard rather than the older version that's not.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. There were several comments where other people were commenting on how the notified body is handling it. In general, what I was reading from the different comments is that the notified body is expecting you to explain what standards you use and why those represent state of the art. We also have seen sometimes where notified bodies disagree with what we provide. So it's same as a classification rationale. Yes, it's our responsibility to present something, but it doesn't mean they'll always agree with us.
Yep. I know that.
And we can't even always guarantee that two notified bodies will be consistent, because they probably won't be.
Well, no, definitely not.
But you only have to deal with the notified body that you're submitting to, because you can't submit the same device to more than one notified body. Another question says, any idea when these updated standards will be available to access through services like IHS?
That's a good question, because you all said the same statement to me about when the TRFs will be generated when someone asked a question about that. And my guess is probably within a month at the most, if not if less than that. My guess is a few weeks to a month.
Yeah.
So hopefully sooner.
There were a couple of series of comments about if we comply with the latest version, so 4th edition, will that automatically also
4th edition of what?
Well, they weren't being specific, but then there's another one that says an equal or higher level of this of safety will result from use of the more recent version or revision of the standard. I think in general, that's the goal, is they keep on increasing the level of safety, but sometimes we do see conflicts where if you complied with the new version, it might conflict with an old version. And so it's not always 100%, and that makes sense when you're talking hundreds of revisions from one version to another. And that is the scope of the changes in some cases. For instance, the alarms, we were talking about this the other day. If you comply with the newest version of the alarm standard, you may conflict with the old version. You might also conflict with other standards. So we could potentially end up with a situation where standards conflict. So you got to take it case by case. Leo's being uncharacteristically silent, which means he probably disagrees.
No, I'm not quite sure what you were asking there. I didn't quite follow the question.
Well, let's say a company is doing testing now to a current standard version, and they've got a new version that's coming out, and they're trying to decide, if I've got testing planned for the next several months here, should I be testing to the current version, or should I be testing to this new version that will be released? Some of them are already released, but some of them will be released shortly. Which one should I be doing testing to? And if I do it to the new version, will notified bodies in countries that recognize the older version have an issue with that?
that becomes a strategy question, I think.
Yeah, and
Almost.
and something to verify, and you may not get the same answer for US, Canada, and Europe. You may get 3 different answers.
I think it's going to be strategy, business, regulatory, quality issue, and
Yeah.
timing and rollout of regulatory.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, this is Bansi. I think question is different. What they're asking is, if I'm complying with the 4th edition, do I still need to comply with 3rd? And one of the comments was that if you complying to 4th, but the country you are sending product to doesn't accept 4th, then you have to still comply with 3, right?
That does happen in some cases too.
Yeah.
Like China sometimes only accepts 3rd for EMC potentially, let's say, and other countries only accept 4th edition of EMC.
So one of the comments was, in those cases, you may have to get 2 different test reports, and in some cases that may mean partial double testing. You've seen that in a few cases?
Bonsi has, and I have
Yeah.
too, and I forgot about that position, but yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
That
So
is potential.
And I have a client that's exactly where they're at. It's a US submission they're working on with me, and they've already done a Chinese submission, and they're struggling with the EMC stuff. They have to redo some of it because what's accepted for China is not accepted for the US. And which one you do first is kind of which
And
one's
China,
going to be submitted first.
China just rolled out, I believe, 3rd edition or 3.1. I'm trying to remember. I just saw this a couple months ago. And I was surprised. I'd have to look back at the emails I got from Gavin on that. Write a note to myself.
So there's some more questions here about some of the dash. So we got 4 different questions here. I'm going to try to go to the more specific ones because I think they'll be a little shorter. So for the 6601-1-12 requires enclosures to be IP33 rated, but it also states they should meet pollution degree 3 or IP54. Those seem to be conflicting levels. Do you have any guidance on ingress protection for EMS environment?
I'd have to dig through the standard. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay. You'll get access to all the chat stuff here. They only have the name here, and the link is Shane. But that question in here, if you have time to answer it for them, you'll have access to all the chats.
Will I have the email? Because I don't know who that is exactly.
Yeah, I'll give you the table of or an Excel spreadsheet with all the emails for everybody. But
okay.
If the person if Shane has an opportunity to send back a quick one privately to their email address to Leo, that'll help them. The next one, the comment was that China only currently accepts 2.1 edition of the EMC, and then somebody else was confirming that. So I have 2 different people that want to hear more about the -1 electromedical amendment updates. So that's your sweet spot. We want to hear more about that.
And how much time do we have?
We have 11. We have 11 minutes. So let's. I think that's your
Shall we
strongest
go
area.
a little over on that one?
I have time if you want to go over, but I think that's a good topic. That's your strength, and that's the general standard. So let's focus on that.
Okay.
You just made Leo's year, everybody. The comment here was, give us the top 3 changes.
Top 3.
What do you think are your top 3?
Geez, that's a hard one. Top three. Well, let me start with the summary then.
Okay.
Lots and lots and lots and lots of clarifications. Some are based on, there's the interpretation sheets that are if you look at this drawing here, there's the technical reports, and I believe it's 60601-4. I think it's 3 is the interpretation sheets, which is a guidance document, and there's, I think, 160 or so interpretation sheets now, roughly, and I'm guessing on the number, which I'm on that committee, but so I should know the number, but I don't. So there's about that many of them. Interpretation sheets. So some of the clarifications are based on those interpretation sheets, and I couldn't tell you how many interpretation sheets we were based on. Chuck would know probably, because he's the one that did a lot of the work on the changes on, because he's been grinding on this for years. There's a couple of modified tests, a few new tests, and this is very much summary. Some updated key standards, a new key standard, which is a state-of-the-art standard, and that's IEC 62368-1, and I will talk about that in a minute. Some new definitions. From 1-2, there's one new definition, which is really an existing definition, but it was brought into the 601 standard specifically. There's a couple 1-8, so 1-2 is the EM disturbances standard. So I'm starting to remember that term finally. 1-8, there's a couple definitions that come in from the alarm standard, and a couple new to the standard itself, which is safety signs, which that definition never existed, even though it's been referenced over and over again. And I will show that symbol that we have been using. The labs have been pushing this symbol, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, because that's one of the big changes that I think actually hopefully will be a good clarification versus using this symbol, which I think is a better thing, because a lot of people have been using both symbols because labs have pushed this, and I think this is a usability issue. When you have both symbols on the product, that mean basically read the user manual, and having both symbols on the product to me is a usability issue. Why do you have both symbols on the product? That becomes an issue that confuses people, I believe. So I have a bug about having both of them, because this is mandatory under 15223. Not that I have any opinions. I never have an opinion, right, Rob?
Never, Leo, never.
Let's see. And there's a new definition called maximum equipment pressure, which is related to pressure vessel tests in 975, which doesn't apply to a lot of medical devices, but it applies to some. And then there's other definitions based on new standard references, such as 14971, which there's a ton of references to risk management in 601 based on risk management file, essential performance, and other various things in the standard. But because of risk management file, there's a ton of risk management, risk analysis, hazards. Those are common terms in the standard. So because we switched from whatever version it was, 2007, I believe it was, to 2019, all the definitions updated basically. And also 62366-1, which was 62366, now updated. So some definitions updated in the standard, but not 60601-1, but because we don't really reference that. We directly reference 62366-1, and then resolving some safety gaps. So that's sort of a big summary of the changes. So yeah,
For
go
the
ahead.
changes that have been made to the -1 standard, is it correct in saying that you shouldn't expect a change in test methods or the testing? It should be a change more in the technical review?
There are some changes in test methods, and I'm working through a Excel spreadsheet on a gap assessment right now. I'm not done with it. There are some test methods that have changed, definitely, like the power cord test.
Okay.
There are some other tests, and I just haven't had time to get through it because I'm doing it in spare time and with 3 kids and one about to go to college. That's driving me insane right now, to put it blunt. He is 18, so that's another issue.
I think you and I discussed the power cord issue a little bit. I think that would be helpful to companies to understand that one a little bit more.
So in the past, if you had detachable power cord and didn't supply it to the test lab would basically grab one out of their bin that was supposedly 3 meters and do the test. And it was sort of an unreliable test because it wasn't a consistent power cord with a consistent cross section and ratings and all that detail. So we decided to go and spec it based on the manufacturer's specs, basically, length and cross section and ratings. And so now the standard basically says, what's it say? As provided or specified length and cross-sectional area by the manufacturer. So the manufacturer is going to have to provide it. And if you have multiple different power cords with different cross-sections and lengths, you may need to provide multiple power cords. Or you might have to provide equivalency proof to the test lab to show that they're equivalent. Say you have different power cords for different countries. So you may need to provide some type of proof. There are a lot of companies, a lot of multinationals that say, well, we don't provide it. We send a spec to the distributor and the distributor provides it. Now what do? You're going to have to talk to the lab and show them that you provide a spec that's consistent across the board. And I think you'll be fine, but then the lab may need to test based on that spec.
So I
don't think that's, yeah.
That's definitely a change in their approach to the testing, and that's also a change in how you document it. You got to have a very clear specs on your power cords, so they know what to have. Alan, did you have something you wanted to add? No, he was just showing his video for a moment. Somebody had another comment on the the -1-6 for usability. Just to clarify that one more time, with this new revision of the -1 series of standards, all 8 of them, we're now referencing the 62366-1 standard instead of the 62366 standard. And therefore, your testing reports and your testing for usability that you're going to do yourself or do it with the help of a lab, not an electrical safety lab, but a usability test lab, that would be according to that -1 standard. And it's referenced in the -1-6 standard, but that's a technical review, not a testing by your electrical safety lab. So they don't do the usability testing for you. You do that and include it in your documentation. So one of the things I find a lot of clients are surprised by when they're doing this for the first time is, oh, I didn't know we needed to have usability, software validation, and risk management done before we can submit our samples of the device for testing at a lab. And many of them have this mistaken belief that the test lab will create that documentation for them. They don't create your risk management documentation for you. They'll help you by telling you what's wrong. Just like a notified body.
After the fact.
And
Because
after the bill is paid.
Typically, yes, that is true.
So if you think the help that you're getting is really helpful, if you think getting a list of all the things you did wrong in a bill is helpful, that's great, but it doesn't get you to market quickly.
Or if you want to do things right, when you do your design work up front, that's when you look at things and you go, okay, let's design this right. Let's look at the risk management file requirements. Let's look at the isolation. Let's look at the components. Let's look at the spacing. Let's look at what's needed, the expected service life, the essential performance. Let's look at the analysis of the essential performance. Let's look at all the steps that are needed up front.
Yeah.
And do a test plan and all the steps that are needed up front early on before we write the design specs would be nice. I don't see that very often.
No,
Way too often.
It's all because almost all of my clients are, I would say over 90% are companies that are doing this for the first time on their first product.
Yep.
None of them are there. and they don't expect to be necessarily, but they haven't been through this before, and they need to know when to contact somebody like you.
Even big manufacturers, I see this issue.
Okay. So
and Leo, one thing new manufacturers and manufacturers don't understand, that they have to be familiar with the standard. They're expecting a consultant would do everything for them. But like you said, if you don't look at the standard and you don't know what you need to comply, consultant or people can only help you so much. You have to look at the standard. You have to be very familiar with the standard and try to see, like you said, what is needed. Think upfront. Don't wait till the last moment and then you get these letters and say, oh, I missed it, or what happened? And then you start doing a blame game that I'm paying consulting so much money. How come I didn't get it? Or how come they didn't give me information?
That's exactly right. And when people Rick Stockton said something along those same lines, when you're doing a design project, a lot of people think that, oh, I don't need somebody like Leo's help until after I have my testing done. No.
No.
Way before
way too late.
Yeah, it's too late then for him to undo some of the mistakes you've made. You want to get his input at the design input stage before you've even started development, so he can tell you, you need to have these creepages, these clearances, these power supply requirements. These are the test standards you're going to go through. These are the things that need to be included in your risk management. So you know where the bar is in your development. If you design your device and then hand it to him, he's going to say, okay, it doesn't meet this requirement, this requirement, this requirement, this requirement, and there's no way I can make it meet those requirements. You have to take those components out and try again. So all the work that you did with those components goes away and you start over again. And yes, we know development is iterative, but you can avoid some of those iterations by starting out with where the bar is, and you can just rule out solutions really quickly. Say, oh, this isn't going to meet that requirement. Let's go on to another option, because that's just not going to cut it. And so I tell people it's really important to have a call with a regulatory expert, so you know the right pathway and so you know the right standards. And if you've got an electromedical device, you need to know what standards and what requirements there are for the design up front before you think of solutions. For anybody that's doing software products, which is almost all electromedical devices, you're going to have to know what software documentation is required right up front as well. You don't want to, oh, I've developed the software and now I'm going to see how I can build my documentation. You're going to just add 6 months to your timeline. You do that. You want to build that documentation as you go. And so we can give you a quick list at no charge. Hey, here's the 14 different documents you need in your software development. And all those things, the risk management, usability, and the software, all are needed as inputs into the electrical safety testing. So you should be getting input from Leo and a regulatory expert at the input stage, design inputs, before you're really digging in deep into the design. And I know people like to build prototypes, but you're just building prototypes that might not meet the requirements.
And then you're wasting a lot of time and money.
Yeah.
Which then puts you behind schedule and behind getting out to the world and not making money.
Yeah. Yeah. And our goal isn't to add a cost to you, it's to save you cost so you don't do these tests twice. People ask me, how much does it cost to do a 510K? That's the wrong question. No matter what I charge, it's still small potatoes in comparison to what it's going to cost you to get through the electrical safety testing. And so,
which I was asked that the other day, and I say the minimum is 20, 30,000, and it goes upwards of 100 plus.
Yeah, I just got a quote today on a very simple device, and it was 39,000. And they asked me, isn't there a bunch of testing in here that isn't necessary? And I said, no, they've got just the bare minimum, and this is a good price. And they were sort of surprised, but I was like, yeah, that's a good price. Take that. Don't go back and shop around for a better price, because that 39,000 for the testing that they're requiring here, this is a pretty good price, because they had all the standards in there. They had the latest versions, and the prices were reasonable from what I had seen other quotes for. And they were like, well, do we need this technical review and the testing? And I'm like, yes, there are two parts. One is they're doing the tests, and the other one's reviewing your documentation and writing their reports. You need both. It's not just hook it up to a machine and see if it passes. It's 3/4 of the work is testing. I mean, it's technical review. And only about a quarter of it, I think, is the actual test lab. And that's why it's costing you so much. You're paying for somebody that
since the third
is an
edition
electrical engineer to do some of this work. Yeah, and that's since third edition.
Shall I go through these symbols?
Yeah, sure. And,
okay.
And anybody that's got to jump off, we're now, I believe, at 1 o'clock. Don't worry, we're actually after 1 o'clock. I will be uploading the recording to YouTube, and so people will be able to see it there. You can share it with people. And Leo's going to get a copy of the native file in Zoom creates a text file of all the comments that you provided. So if you want a specific question answered, it helps to include your name in there, because he'll be able to figure out who it is. And anybody that needs,
include your last name, please.
Yeah, the last name helps, and
so, it will help a lot.
It does, because we had 500 plus people register, and we had over 100 people on the line live today. It just tells me 100 plus, so I don't know what the real number is. Hopefully we'll.
Yeah, I only saw 100.
Yeah.
Okay. So consult the accompanying document, or the IFU symbol. So this is the mandatory symbol, and this was sort of the optional symbol, if if it's wasn't required or mandatory per what the standard said. So 723 in the standard, which clause 7 is basically all the marking labeling requirements of the standard. And 723 basically said this was a mandatory symbol, and this was not a mandatory symbol, how it was written before. Now it's been rewritten to hopefully clarify things and reduce the use of this symbol, which all the labs basically got all up in arms and said, you have to use this symbol. So pretty much every medical device, I won't say all, but a huge majority of symbols, because the test houses did not understand how the standard was written, insisted that this symbol, is it showing that my mouse is moving?
Yes, it is. It's showing.
Okay, good. that this symbol be put on the device or on the labeling of the packaging of the sterile pouch or whatever. And on the sterile pouch, doing blue and white is very expensive because most sterile pouches are black and white, which I had a major argument probably 7 years ago when I was a product reviewer for NSAI before I left NSAI for a long long break before I came back to NSAI. And I lost that battle, and it was black and white. And I'll leave it at that. And I used to call this the blue man symbol, but now I've stayed mute on that comment. So now it says in the standard, use only if the manufacturer determines from their risk management, so I like the keyword, use risk management process, that reading info. Can you mute, Rob? Let me read that again, because that was hard to hear over. Use only if the manufacturer determines from their risk management process that reading info in the IFU or user manual is a mandatory action necessary to control a specific risk to an acceptable level. So it makes it more specific that it's for risk management specifically.
So if there's a very likely use error if you don't read the instructions, that's when you use this symbol. And the use error has to cause harm. So it's not just a use error, but it's a use error that causes harm. That's when we have a safety issue, and that's when you want to use the symbol. Otherwise, it's read the instructions because it's important information, which is the lower symbol. But the upper symbol is only supposed to be used in those rare cases, and this new standard clarifies that, so you can, when you have a notified body auditor that's not aware of this standard or doesn't remember it because it's brand new, clarify that for them and provide the reference. That's you push back and quote the standard where it explains it and clarifies it. But somebody was asking, what do you do if you're laser engraving so you can only do black and white? And I can't imagine a scenario where a device could only have laser engraving, and you're going to be, that's how you're going to be putting all your warnings on there. But I could be wrong.
I've seen it on endoscopes where that's been an issue.
But okay.
I've seen that argument. And then
but an endoscope is also a sterile device, so you should have a package. Before they open up the package, they're going to see this label on there.
And then it's going to be black and white.
Not on the label. This person was saying laser engraving, which means it's on the device.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You can't put this symbol on the device, but you can put it on the label for the device, which you're not going to sell an endoscope without a label.
Yeah, if you do a sterile package for it.
Yeah.
Then it gets a little dicey. And then there's the argument in the EU that you can do non-colored labeling. There's been an argument in the EU about that, but let's not get into that. So there's one other point with this labeling, with this specific labeling in the Annex A, the guidance and rationale. So it's guidance. This safety sign should not be used for indicating that it's a mandatory action to read the IFU for disclosure of residual risk, because it's not specific to residual risk.
Yeah.
Which is an important note to understand.
Yeah. Residual risk, you go to the other symbol, but you need to do this so you will avoid a use error, and it's critical for safety reasons. That's what that's for. And there was a lot of people feel more symbols is better, and that's not a great strategy.
It's so labeling is the worst form of mitigation. Period. The end.
Yeah,
and
we
it's
just start
very,
to
very,
ignore
very
them.
clear. Yeah. Yeah.
And same thing with alarms. It's
It's distracting.
Yeah. We're getting a whole bunch of additional comments here, but we're also 15 minutes past the top of the hour. So what I will.
I'm good to go for another half hour. I'm up to it. If people are up to it, it's up to you and your schedule, Rob.
We'll do 5 more minutes, so we'll cover a couple of these questions that came up just now. But then we're going to have to stop the recording. And
okay.
Like I said, any questions you put in here, Leo will see it in the text file that shows all the comments. But you can also email him and schedule meetings. So if you want a quick answer, thing to do is get it on his calendar. So one of the comments we already covered.
And I am going on vacation next week, so I'm not answering next week. Sorry.
Surgical handpieces and endoscopes was what they were talking about, and it was laser engraving. So that was where they were coming from. ISO 14971 says that we should implement additional risk controls, even though the risk is already acceptable. So most risk managers would still push for the mandatory sign. I'm more with you, Leo, here. When you use, just because you've added a symbol doesn't mean you've actually reduced risk at all. It's actually confusing, and that's not what that symbol means. So that risk manager needs to read what the definition of this is, and you only use it when they're supposed to.
Yeah, it causes more confusion, this symbol.
Yeah, they're
and symbols are not well understood.
That's
Remember,
correct.
I'm on 15223-1. I can tell you, if you bring half the symbols to an ordinary user that doesn't know these symbols, they're not going to understand half the symbols that are on a product. Guaranteed.
Well, I've got a client that actually has embedded videos into their display device. So every single time you use the device, there's access to videos that you can play, so you can learn how to use the device properly and get some of these warnings directly from the manufacturer in video format. But when you do usability testing, I've done a lot of reviewing of de novo submissions where you've got a new device and a new indication that could have some unique risks that nobody's had before. In those devices, they have 3 types of formative testing that they do for usability before you even get to the summative testing. During that development phase, the first one is to look at different design features. So you might have a feature that is different from other devices that are on the market, and you want to figure out which is the best version of this design feature that will reduce risks as far as possible. That's an opportunity to do some formative testing. Another one is in the actual development of your instruction for use. Big blocks of text with really big words are not the best way to explain how to use something to somebody. Pictures work really, really well. You can say 1,000 words with a picture, and if you can use videos for teaching, that's another thing to consider. But pictures are really powerful to show incorrect and correct orientation or the correct way to turn a switch or to connect something properly. And very common things to look for visually, oh, this is not correct. And then the third type of formative testing is, they say, to develop the actual training of new users, you should do some formative testing. So we try to come up with, oh, they'll understand this, and then we find out the hard way that they didn't understand it at all. So make sure you consider doing some formative testing on your actual training program for new users, because there is a requirement in the standard to validate your training of new users.
This is the other big change we should try to get in real quick.
Okay, great.
So alarms, there's the table that used to be in the standard or was in the standard that supposedly talked about alarms, but never really did, which had, I think, warning cautions and I think ready for use. And it was like this small little part, but now actually explains alarms and alarm conditions and goes into a lot more detail of what a warning and a caution is, and goes into, if you look over here, what operator requirements are. So a warning can have a red, not flashing indicator, and for caution can be yellow, not flashing. So it's much more detailed. Ready for use is very similar to what it was. It actually probably is exactly the same. But here, it explains for a warning, you can avoidance of a hazardous situation which could cause death or serious injury. I was shocked when I read this, that actually was the definition. This came out of the alarms committee. So, and here you have the definitions of high priority alarm, medium priority alarm, low priority alarm, and it's all tied to the alarms standard.
And
Very
keep in mind,
specifically.
everybody, that first one at the top of the list was a flashing red light, and I think we can all point to at least 10 different devices.
Flashing.
Oh, I'm sorry, not flashing. So we can all point to devices that have not flashing red lights as an indicator for something that doesn't mean you're going to die. And based on what this wording here is, we're only supposed to be using that indicator for serious injuries and death to avoid that hazardous situation. So there's a lot of things like you have a battery that's low and people will have a red light come on, and they might think it's a great way to do it, but that doesn't meet this requirement.
Yeah, so you need to be careful. And it does allow for sound to be played, but it does caution you that it needs to not conflict with what the alarm sounds are in 60601-8. So you do need to be aware of what the sounds are in 60601-8. And then there's a lot of other detail in here, but this is so much better than it was in 3.1 of 60601-8. So this is a really key, critical table to be aware of. And so I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this. So this is one of the big changes that I was thrilled to see.
Somebody just had a really good question. This particular table here, I know a lot of people will want to see. Do you have it was only a handful of slides you showed here. Can you share those as a file with me that I can send out to everybody along with the link to the YouTube video?
I need to think about that because these are, even the drafts are copyrighted.
Okay.
So I need to think about that.
So this table is actually table 2 from one of the standards, the alarm standard.
Yeah, I took it out of a draft.
Okay.
So what's on the screen, you can, obviously share in the YouTube. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that.
Okay. So the ones that you can share, they would like a copy, but the ones you can't, if you could say table 2 in this standard, then they'll have to go by the standard, which they're going to have to go by it anyway.
Yeah, which I think, other than the first 2 slides up, these first 2 things here, I can share, obviously, because those are things I generated. These are out of standards. These ISO sells these things online. I can point you to where you can look on an ISO web page and you can see these on the ISO, but these are sold by ISO for 30 Swiss francs, I think. Because it's ISO, they sell everything.
Yeah.
This is in the standard, and this is in the standard.
Yep. Yeah, and this is on the creepage and clearance, and this is a clarification on how to measure it.
Yeah, they had a typo from the previous edition to the next the new edition.
The table that people were asking about, that was not from the -1, that was from the -1-8, correct?
No, it was from 60601-1.
Okay, so it's a reference to the alarm standard. Okay, so
Well,
it's table 2 and -1.
Yeah, it's table 2 in -1. And
Okay.
it's an existing table that now they updated. So now you can see the whole table is why I shrunk it.
Okay, thank you.
That way people, if they want to take screenshots, I can't do anything about it. Hint, hint.
Yeah, anybody that's doing this really needs to get a copy of the standard, read through it anyway.
Yeah, well, of course, they're going to have to.
Yeah.
And IEC has it, but I would never buy anything from IEC. I would go to Estonia. That's the cheapest way to do it, and buy 2 copies, not 1. Otherwise, you won't be able to print it, and you won't be able to have an unlocked copy, I believe, if I remember right.
So we're
yeah.
gonna do a little bit of me sharing for a moment here, just so people know what Leo's talking about here. And that's it. This is going to be it for the day. Our cheat. So evs.ee. This is the Estonian website, and I've had people like, "Well, is this a legit site? Can we really trust it?"
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful what you go search for too.
Yes, but if we were looking for 6601-1, you're going to get what standards they have available, and if it's not released yet, you may have to wait a little bit, but they give you the different versions here. Yeah,
because it's a parallel vote through Senelec, so it's not there yet because Senelec hasn't released it.
So we got maybe another 2 months or more?
I don't know. I have that question out to my counterparts in NSAI.
And if you're impatient and need it now, then probably your least expensive way to do it is to going to be, number 1, have a membership of one of the societies that publish it, and number 2, some of them bundle. I know AAMI has some nice bundles for medical device standards. You might look at that as well.
Yeah, that's up to 1,1600 if you're a member.
Is it that high now? Wow.
Yeah, they doubled it. Yeah.
Yep.
I pay for that every year. That's one of the few things I pay for.
Yep. So this is the person that's paying out of his own pocket. This is where to get it if it's available. But if you're not willing to wait, you're going to pay top dollar and get it out of one of the other standards organizations, and you will pay top dollar. I think that's it for today, what we have time for. I know Leo has a little bit more time, but I got to get going here. We're almost at 1:30.
So what I might do is, I will probably share some of my additional notes that I wrote up as some of the notes to send out.
Okay, wonderful.
Great.
Thank you very much, Leo. You did a great job today. And
well, thank you.
One last little note, I have a new employee that accepted a position today, so we're going to have
congratulations. Who is that?
Her name is Sharon Morrow. She's out of Knoxville, Tennessee. So.
Oh, cool. Congratulations. I know that was a big search for you.
Yeah, but it only took like a month, so not even a month. So we're very happy it went so quick relative to what other companies are having, but she'll need some training from you, so probably a good idea to pay you to do the whole group. So we'll schedule that for after you get back from vacation.
After a remote audit too, but yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Good talking.